it, fam. Let's get to it. This is the most controversialist book ever, and arguably more controversial than the book. Actually, I don't think it's arguably at all. I think it's very straightforward. More controversial than the book itself is the one that the book refers to, God. Now, whatever your take is on God, whatever your perspective is on God, whatever you think about God, I arrived at this fundamental conclusion the moment I sought to find out whether or not God was real. If God is real, then God must exist independent of our own personal feelings, meaning that what we think about God cannot manipulate or change the identity of God in the slightest bit. If what we think about God can be shaped by our personal perspective, by our own personal beliefs, by our own personal ideas, then God ceases to be the creator and he becomes the created. Meaning, if what God's attributes are is determined by our perspective of what we believe those attributes should or shouldn't be, then we create the God that we say we serve. Many people have no problem with that belief system. Many people have no problem with that ideology. Why can't God simply be whatever I want God to be? Because if that's the case, you're the creator of God and God is not the creator of you. Every person, I don't care who you are, whenever a person meets you, whenever they come into your sphere of influence, whenever they come into your surroundings, there are attributes about you those people have to accept regardless. There are characteristics and attributes about you you will not compromise for anybody. I don't care who they are. If they don't really like those attributes and they don't like those characteristics, they can kick rocks. You know what I'm saying? If they don't like those attributes and characteristics about you, then they can leave. But if that person chooses to be in your life, then they have to accept you on your terms. God is no different. The problem that we have with God is if that's the case, God has a standard. God has a requirement for what is right and what is wrong. And that, my friends, is the reason why we have a problem with God. It's not the ideal of God that we have a problem with. It's not the ideal of God being the creator and God having this and God wanting things to be a particular way. It's that if God is real, we can't manipulate God. We can't force God to be what we want him to be. And that, my friends, is the problem. See, when you deal with people, you can argue whatever you want to. Look at the climate that we live in right now. At any given moment, a person can simply say, I choose to be this. And then we have to say that as being the case. But that can change periodically. If they choose to be this today and that tomorrow, then how do we really know what is and what isn't? But that's the difference between humans and God. God says, I am the Lord thy God. I changeth not. Why does he make that a standard? Any parent who has children knows that in order for you to raise your children properly, you have to be consistent on what you believe and what you stand for. If you waver back and forth between what you think is right and wrong, then your children have no idea about how they're supposed to live, how they're supposed to adjust, how they're supposed to acclimate. They have no standard or way of living, so they just fly by the seat of their pants, so to speak. But if I know what the standard is, and I know what's right, and I know what's expected of me, then I know how to carry my life accordingly. The reason why God says I change not is because whether it's this generation, the next generation, 10 generations from now, or 20 generations before, the standard was always the standard. The standard is always the standard. See, humans want to adjust our lives based on what feels good to us at the moment. We want to change our perspective and change our ideas about right and wrong in a way that suits me at the moment I have to make a decision. Jordan Peterson said, "Judge not lest you be judged also." It's what people expect of you, right? It's what they expect you to live by all the time. So when you say this is right, they expect it to be right all the time. They expect you to act in a manner that shows that you believe this is right. If you say this is wrong, they expect that to be your standard. So when you go along and you say this and you say that, and then all of a sudden you find yourself in the same situation that you was judging other people by, if you don't hold yourself to that standard, other people are going to hold you to that standard, regardless what you think about it. Now, you said this yesterday and you've always said this, and now today you living in a way that doesn't agree with what you said you believed and what you stood on. And that's how you judged everybody else. God is the same way. When you read this word and you see things that it says God said this and God said that, it's not God's attributes that we're judging. And it's the most difficult thing for me to accept about, or people to accept about God. It's people whose standards are changing. And God is holding them to their standard. That's difficult because we say, well, God said this and God said that, but that was the standard for the people. That wasn't the standard for God. God's standards have always been the same. Jesus said it like this. They came up to him and said, well, is it right for us to divorce? And Jesus said, no, it's not right for you to divorce. Well, Moses said that. He said, Moses said that because of your hearts. He wasn't saying it because that was God's standard. He was saying that because y'all were going to do it anyway. So he made these concessions for the right way to do wrong, so to speak. And that's the way we are as human beings. See, we want to change the standard and manipulate the standard whenever it suits us. Whenever we look at something and we think something or we feel something or we want something to be that way at that particular moment, then my standard changes to fit that moment. I'm a firm believer that the reason why it's so difficult for some societies to do better, some groups within a society to do better, is because people have a hard time holding people to that standard. See, the standard that we want to judge other people by isn't the standard that we want to live by. And whenever our group, as a matter of fact, if I'm not mistaken, this condition is called the fundamental attribution error. It says that when, from a society standpoint, when you have identified yourself with a particular group, whatever that group is seen as good, then you identify it to character. And whenever that group does something bad, you identify it with circumstance. The flip side, the other group, whenever they do something good, you associate that to circumstance. And when they do something bad, you associate it to character. The reason why this is considered to be an error is because sometimes your group was just faulty, but you identified with them. So therefore, you can't call them faulty. You got to call them good, because if I say that I'm a part of that group and they did something bad, I don't want to be identified with that. So I have to change the standard. It's the circumstance they was in, not the character. But how can you say that that person was a good person or it wasn't that person's character? It didn't matter. You said you identified with them and they did something bad. So therefore, you have to identify yourself with something bad. So you have to change the standard. God doesn't change his standard for us. Now, he may accept us while we're working through some things. He may accept some things that we have done or we do while he's trying to mold us and shape us into where he's trying to get us. But he changes not. His standard is his standard. Because if he changes his standard, he ceases to be God. God said, heaven and earth to fall away before my word will. I can't let my word come back void. So everything I say, I mean. Everything I say, I do. That's why we have a hard time with God. Because, see, we can manipulate people. We can manipulate circumstances. We can manipulate the environment. We can manipulate the standards, but we can't manipulate God. That's why people have a hard time with God. See, we can shame people into believing that the way I live is right and what I think is right and what I think is wrong. We can shame people into trying to accept and justify however I choose to live my life, but we can't shame God. God said, I am that I am. That settles it. I learned this. I know I'm about to go off on another tangent real quick before I close. If God is real and God doesn't change, then I have to give God an opportunity to show me that his standard is best for me. Not it feels good for me, not that it makes me happy all the time, but that it produces for me the best version of me I can possibly be. And God's standard is not just that you produce better, but that you are better for other people. We have gotten so comfortable with wanting us that we will tear up everything just to get the thing that we want. We'll even change what's right and what's wrong just to suit us. If you really want right and you really want better, you have to accept truth on God's terms, not in a way that suits you or fits you, but on his terms. He's the creator of everything. He gave order in life to everything. It's his world. We're just a part in it. It would serve us to get on board with what he says is right and give him a chance to show that what he says is right. He's not trying to harm you. He says, I know the plans that I have for you, not to hurt you and to harm you, but to give you a hope in the future. Try him on this. Test him on this. On his terms, not yours. All right, y'all. That's my 2 cents on the 2-piece. Y'all be blessed.
Now you're locked in.